Pretty good. Thanks for waiting.
I would like first to give a shout-out to my friends on the Atheist versus Christian Debate Central Facebook page. They had encouraged me very strongly to call you, and I was not going to do it today, but fortunately I had a chance to do it. I am a Christian, and I debate on this page pretty often. I just have one question for you, and maybe a follow-up question. I know that you acknowledged being a Christian for years up into your early adulthood.
Are you talking to either one of us? Because that's true for both of us.
Yeah.
Yes, well, you specifically. By the way, if any of you have children, happy Mother's Day for Jen.
Okay.
If you have children.
I do.
I'm not sure. Like I say, I keep up with the show a little bit, but I don't know a lot about your lives. But every once in a while, I tune into the show as far as on YouTube after it's already been recorded. But my question for you, Matt, was since you acknowledged believing Christ as a child,
well, as an adult.
Okay, yeah, up into adulthood. Hypothetically speaking, if you were to die and find out everything in the Bible is true, could you ever stand before God and say, I never had enough information to believe you existed?
Yes. And moreover, if I were to die and find out that everything in the Bible is true, I would have enough integrity to identify that God as a moral thug.
I've heard that plenty of times from atheists, so I'm not surprised.
Well,
so
if everything in the Bible is true, then God sanctioned slavery, and that's immoral.
Well, as far as slavery,
actually, Matthew, because that's my go-to thing that we do over and over again. Instead of, let's just pretend like I didn't mention slavery, and you can answer your follow-up.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So you said that you could stand before God and say, I never had enough information to believe you, even though you admitted believing in Him as a child.
Yes, because it's possible to believe things for bad reasons, and the reason I don't believe is because I found out that I had bad reasons for my belief and could not find good ones.
Okay, now this is my follow-up question, and that's really it.
Okay.
Since you agreed that you believed in Him for the wrong reasons, so to speak, as a child.
And an adult.
Could you acknowledge that possibly there is a such thing as a no true Christian? As you know, Anthony Flew coined the phrase "no true Scotsman."
Okay, he didn't, but
a common argument. Could you acknowledge that I did not really understand what I was believing?
Actually, he might have. You're asking me if I can acknowledge that. I think you're asking me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that my view of Christianity when I was a believer may have been the incorrect view. Like there's some other version.
That's not necessarily the incorrect view, because I watched your deconversion story on YouTube, and you said you went before you said you accepted Christ into your heart, kind of believed all that stuff.
Yes.
Which is very common if you study the Bible. It pretty much is open about children accepting Christ, coming to Christ from the mouth of babes. God has ordained praise. They naturally know, according to the Bible, it teaches that they naturally know who their Creator, who God is. And you kind of demonstrated that there as a child.
Then I'm just trying to, I don't understand your question, so maybe try and phrase it one more time.
Well, the second part is, since you acknowledge believing for the wrong reason, does that mean that you are not a true Christian to begin with?
Okay. Yeah. I actually have a video I posted about this, and I think it's on my YouTube channel. It may be called something like, was I ever a true Christian or something like that. I have to look it up. So there is a longer answer to this, in part because it came up in discussions with Ray Comfort. And my answer is this. If your definition of true Christian is someone who actually has a relationship with the risen Christ, then I was never a true Christian. But I also don't believe anybody else is, because I don't believe there's a risen Christ to have a relationship with. If your definition of true Christian is someone who is convinced that they have that relationship, then yes, I definitely was convinced. And I think probably one of the biggest things that'll maybe make this clear for you is I recently did a debate with Mike Lacona on the resurrection, and I did it at an unapologetics conference in a Baptist church. And members of my former church, the First Baptist Church of Harvester in St. Charles, Missouri, that I hadn't seen in 30 years, flew down here to attend to this debate, and one of them got up during the Q&A to basically say, hey, you may not remember me, but back when you were active in the church, we all expected you to go on to great things and all the sorts of things that you would expect from someone in the youth group who everybody expects to be a minister. And his question was basically, what happened? So not only was I convinced that I had this relationship, but the people around me, family and church members, were also convinced of that. So whether or not I was a true Christian entirely depends on how you want to define it.
Okay. So, one last question. As far as this past October, you moderated a debate between Ehrman and Price.
Yeah.
And you had kind of admitted that Ehrman done a better job presenting the evidence than Price did. Did any of that persuade you towards, hey, maybe Christ is a historical figure, or is that something you're still kind of wrestling with?
I don't have any problem with the idea that there may have been an actual person. I think, for me personally, I remain unconvinced of the mythicist position, which would assert something, Jesus did not exist, that I don't think they can demonstrate. My position is there's still a big problem here, because if Jesus existed, and if he was divine, and if he died for people's sins and was resurrected, etc., these facts should be wholly unassailable. They should be the most clearly attested, obvious. There should be no possibility that someone could object. And so while I'm okay with the idea that there's an actual person there, there may or may not been. There may be several people there. But if you look through the Gospels, for example, and start removing everything about Jesus' life for which we don't have independent, reliable confirmation, we can't independently, reliably confirm miracles. We have no good reason to think that the words that are attributed to him, written decades later, are as accurate as some people might think they were. I mean, I've heard lots of speeches. I've heard lots of speeches in the last year. I've heard some that were incredibly important, and I might remember a phrase from it. But to think that I could recite the entirety of something like the Sermon on the Mount and not make mistakes is bizarre. And when we have something like the Gospels, who we have no idea who wrote them, they weren't written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so those are names that the church put on there. If we start extracting all the things that are claimed about Jesus and say, this pile over here represents things we can't confirm, even the date, they got the dates on the census wrong. They have different genealogies. We can't even confirm that his name was Yeshua, if he was there. Maybe there were 4 different itinerant Jewish rabbis, because we know there were a bunch of messianic figures around this time that got glommed together and had things added to it. I'm not saying that is the case. I'm just saying that it's not absurd to consider that as a possibility. And this is a damning problem for Christianity, the fact that they cannot unassailably demonstrate that Jesus was in fact a real person, let alone that he performed miracles and was divine, etc. So, I mean, I could concede that Jesus existed. I could concede that he did some of the things that are reported and that we have a somewhat accurate record of things he said. And that still doesn't get me anywhere near concluding that he performed miracles and was divine, or that this divine nature was something that I should care about, because when we start talking about the idea of substitutionary atonement, the idea that a God would come down and take human form and kill himself to serve as a loophole for rules that he created, is already absurd and immoral. So the question of whether or not it's true, I don't side with the mythicists in saying Jesus didn't exist. but I side with him in saying, boy, Christianity certainly hasn't and seems incapable of meeting its burden of proof that he did exist.
Okay, if Christianity met their burden of proof, everything that you just mentioned, which obviously a lot of that you just mentioned could be debatable as far as who wrote the gospel, stuff like that, because there are, obviously I'm sure you know about several of the books out there that kind of trace that back and do attribute Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to writing those, which, that's debatable.
No.
I'm not really interested in that at the moment.
So not even New Testament scholars within Christianity hold to this idea that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I mean, you can find somebody on the fringe of scholarship, just like you can find somebody on the fringe of scholarship within mythicism. But even within Christianity, in Christian,
Josh McDowell, some of those is ones I'm thinking about, and I know that
Josh McDowell does not. If Josh McDowell says that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I'll buy you a steak dinner.
Okay. Well, I can tell you, James,
but he's still wrong either way. But
but here's my view, my position on that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not their gospel, it's Christ's gospel. I understand why their names are not attributed to it, because we're not actually trying to give them credit for it. This is the gospel of Christ. So
what do you mean by Matthew? What do you mean by it's the gospel of Christ?
Well, obviously, it's the death and resurrection of Christ.
Okay, but if I write a book about Elvis, is it my book or Elvis's book?
Well, it would be your book, obviously.
Okay. Right.
But we're not talking. See, what I'm saying is, Jesus, we don't worship them. You would be acknowledged for being the author. Yes.
Yeah. But so does that mean?
Even if you never wrote the book about Elvis, it wouldn't change who Elvis was. Somebody else would have written the book about Elvis.
But you don't get to assume that my book about Elvis is factually correct.
No, I'm not saying you get to assume. You're an atheist. Obviously, you don't. Obviously,
I don't know what being an atheist has to do with whether or not my book about Elvis is factually correct.
I'm a Christian. I obviously I take it on faith that everything written is, as you know, as a Christian, the right Matthew live by faith.
Matthew, we can have no conversation then, because if you're going to take it on faith that this is accurate, is there anything that you couldn't take as accurate based on faith?
What do you mean in the gospel?
Anywhere.
Anywhere.
Couldn't you use faith to just be an excuse to believe whatever you want?
Well, yes.
Okay. So that, Matthew, means that faith is not a pathway to truth, and not a reliable pathway to truth, right?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not a pathway to truth.
Okay.
Just like
so
why of that may be true,
Matthew, why then would you say that you accept this thing, the single most important thing, on faith?
Because before I became a Christian at age 19, I read the Bible beforehand. There was a lot of things in it that, well, this is kind of interesting. I don't really quite understand it. Once I accepted Christ as my Savior, I started understanding it much more, started studying it more in depth. And as I started looking at the world through what the Scripture says, and my atheist friends would laugh at me just because I actually say I put my Bible glasses on when I look at the world. And what I have found is what the Bible pretty much says about the world has been demonstrated, as far as I can say, pretty accurately.
Such as?
To take it, well, for example, Matt brought up God being an immoral
thug.
God.
Thug, yeah.
The Bible actually is pretty, and I believe it's Psalms or Proverbs 1, it pretty much says that. There's some will view God as a shrewd God, some will view him as pure.
Yeah, how do you tell which one of them is right?
Well, obviously, if both of us, if there's some that view it
moral character, and you look at him as a moral character. And when I ask you, and I ask you why you view him as a moral character, it's because you put on your God glasses and take it on faith, how do we tell which one of us is actually right about that character?
Faith. That's all. But you take.
I don't need faith, and I don't have any use for faith. And by the way, I don't think you do either. For example, let me ask you this: is it morally correct to own another person as property?
No.
Okay, then why does the Bible not only allow it, but describe all the circumstances you would need to justify it?
Actually, the Bible condemned slavery.
No, it doesn't. Matthew,
thou shalt not steal. Yes or no?
Matthew,
that had nothing to do.
Stealing it.
Okay, this is the dishonest. Yes, this is the dishonesty of putting on your God glasses, because you're not actually looking at Matthew. Let me finish. You're not looking at it with your God glasses. You're looking at it with the God glasses of an interpretation of a particular selection. Have you read Exodus 21?
I just want I just want a simple answer: yes or no. When you take somebody against their will, is it stealing their freedom? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, will you answer my question? Have you read Exodus 21? Yes. What does Exodus 21 say about slavery?
I don't know. You have to quote the verse.
Oh, it's the whole damn chapter.
The whole thing.
And just for you, I'm going to read it.
Which one do you?
I'm going to read it so
ahead.
that you don't say I'm taking this out of context. Exodus 21, this is the NIV. Do you have a preferred version? I can switch real quick.
English Standard Version is my preferred version.
Absolutely.
You can do the NIV. I don't really care, but ESV is usually my preferred.
No, I will go with the English Standard Version. Let me...
Okay.
English Standard Version. Oh, sorry, I picked English Standard Version Anglicanized. I should have just gone with English Standard Version. There we go.
ESV.
Here we go, for fun. Now there are rules that you shall set before them. Exodus 21, beginning at verse 1. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out for free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. He comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. So this is specific. The first few verses are specifically about Hebrew slaves. And it specifically says, when you buy your Hebrew slaves, and it applies to male slaves, it gives you the rules on when they must go free. But if you give them a wife and kids, they remain your property. But if the slave says, beginning at verse 6, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door of the outdoor post, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, basically pierce it. It's not a brutal. It's, I'm going to tag you like a sheep. Mm-hmm. And he shall be his slave forever. So already we have a way, just with regard to the slavery of the Hebrews, that you can essentially trick and result in having a Hebrew slave that is yours forever. But it gets worse than that. Sorry?
You would consider that a trick?
Well, yeah.
Hey, I bought a slave and I have to let him go after 6 years, but if I give him a wife and he wants to stay, he's mine forever? Yeah, I'd consider that a trick.
Well, how did he become a slave?
However, Matthew, the fact that you focus on that as a trick, rather than the fact that already we've shown that it is possible and encouraged by the Bible that you can buy slaves and that you have a specific treatment for Hebrew slaves and that you can still end up with Hebrew slaves that are yours forever, don't focus on the trick, focus on the morality. Take your God glasses off for a second, or your selective God glasses, and continue.
Okay,
because I'm not done. I'm not done.
Oh,
I'm not
more.
remotely done. I'm not done.
There's much more, Matthew.
In verse, we're continuing on in verse 7. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. So now we have a separate rule for how to treat your female slaves. If she does not please her master, I wonder what that means, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. If he designates her for his son, wow, that's cool, he shall deal with her as a daughter. Oh, so now we bought a female slave, and eventually she gets to be treated like a daughter, which, by the way, is not necessarily which is not necessarily a good thing, as daughters and wives are property and don't hold the same value or rights as men in the Bible that you're applauding. If he takes another wife to himself, hang on, what do you mean another wife? Does that mean the slave that he bought first was a wife? Because now we're talking about another wife? He shall not diminish her food, clothing, or her marital rights. And if he does not do these things for her, then she shall go out for nothing. That's how they get out of it. So, verse 12, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. This has nothing to do with slavery. It's just a general rule. If you strike a man and he dies, then you get put to death. But if he doesn't, but if he didn't lay in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he can flee. But if a man willfully attacks another man to kill him by cunning, so basically we're going through, hey, here's some stuff going on. Whoever strikes his father or mother shall be put to death. Who steals a man and sells him, whoever steals a man and sells him and found in possession of him shall be. But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. This is, Exodus 21, by the way, is not the only passage that talks about this. There's also passages in Leviticus and Deuteronomy that specifically tell you to buy slaves from the heathen that surround you, that the slaves are yours. Yes, you could bring up that after 50 years in the year of Jubilee, you have to let them go free. But, how long did people live then? Argument over. But it says these people become your property, become your money. They can be passed on to your children.
You're talking about the foreign slaves, correct? And
for foreign slaves, it's explicit. For Hebrew slaves, it's only after you pierce their ear and they become your property forever. You can then pass them on to your children. However, here's the question. Is there anything that is immoral in what I just read?
No, and here's why.
No, you're done.
Oh.
And you can claim that I'm dishonestly refusing to listen to your garbage all you want. You can go throw a fit. You already acknowledged that it was immoral to own another person's property, and I just read you the verses that show you how you can buy the heathen from their lands that surround you and make them your property to pass on to your children, and how you can also trick Jews doing into it. I'm not interested in your, let me find a way to twist this and see if it makes it work, because I'm more moral than that, and I think you are too, and I find it repulsive that your religion is poisoning you so much that you could start off by saying it's immoral to own people as property, and when I read you the verse in your book that explicitly says, in no doubt about it, no specific interpretation, that you can own people as property, and then I ask you if it's immoral, your answer is no. You are done here. And you need to take a personal inventory of both your morality and your religion, because it is inhuman and embarrassing.
I have to say, I love the fact that you asked him if he had ever read Exodus 20, and he said,
yeah,
or Exodus in general. He said, well, yeah, and then he didn't know what it was. So yeah,
it's all right. I don't have every verse memorized. Just the convenient ones.
No, but I mean that's kind of a central thing, and it's one of the things that if you're a Christian and you don't wrestle with that particular part of the Bible, I think you're doing it wrong. And obviously, James or whatever his name was, he had come to terms with this in some way. I think he's wrong, and I think it's immoral how he tried to justify that.
Yeah, I'm not interested in the tap dance.
But I don't get the sense that he actually had ever wrestled with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think he just accepted the justifications that he'd been provided.
Well, this is the same thing I did.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, what he was describing here, when he said that as soon as he saw things through the lens of faith, mm-hmm. then he started to believe, he started to see, all this stuff. And that is a textbook description of indoctrination. Mm-hmm. As soon as you're indoctrinated that this is the way and this is how you have to see things, and you just trust this inner feeling, this faith, then everything will fall into place. That's what indoctrination does to you.
This is why when he acknowledged that there's nothing that you can't justify based on a faith claim. Yeah. So he believes the Bible, he believes it based on faith. And so what he'll do is he'll pick out the verses that he thinks are opposed to slavery, as he did at the start. Mm-hmm. Oh, you shouldn't covet. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm not opposed to coveting either. By the way, the United States is built on coveting, keeping up with the Joneses. It's
right.
It's what actually makes
our economic system is built on that.
Holy crap, my neighbor just got a new car and it's way more awesome than mine. I covet it. And it can, in fact, encourage me to work harder and save more in order to get a better car, which might also be better for the environment. So coveting can lead to good things. The Bible is one of the most simplistic pieces of work ever written. Yeah. Thou shalt not kill. Well, have you looked at the penal code related to killing another human being? There's murder 1, murder 2, murder 3, manslaughter, involuntary homicide, all these things, because we recognize that life's more complicated than thou shalt not kill. Meanwhile, right after thou shalt not kill comes a whole bunch of killing. Mm-hmm. Oh, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's ox. My neighbor doesn't have an ox.
Yeah.
If the fact, the inclusion of the ox there, yes, I understand. It's about coveting anything. But if you were God and you were inspiring and you wanted to discourage people from coveting, would you actually include language about your neighbor's ox or ass? I mean, your neighbor might have a nice ass. But wouldn't you just go with, thou shalt not covet? Because I would be over at Jen's coveting that damn thing all the time. Oxes are cool. Oxes. Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean,
I've lost the ability to speak English.
I mean, and the thing, to try to claim that thou shalt not covet means that you're not supposed to take slaves, all that means is that you can have slaves, you just can't covet your neighbor's slave.
Yeah.
You know?
Hey, but by the way, just as a tip for Christians, this won't help you out a whole lot, but it'll help you out a little bit. If somebody comes up to you and talks to you about slavery, don't go for verses about coveting. Instead, you might want to try going to where Paul asks for his slave friend to be let go. That doesn't tell you anything about Paul's position on slavery or Jesus's or God's, but at least it's stronger than thou shalt not covet.
Yeah.
I missed the one question that I love to ask and should have. If it's not immoral, James, will you be my slave under what the Bible says I'm allowed to do? Would you willingly agree, not even just let me purchase you and point to the Bible and say you have to go along with this? Would you volunteer to be my slave under what the Bible says about slaves and what I have a right to do to slaves and what your rights are? I know you're not on the line anymore. That was a dramatic pause because I don't believe any person would do that. Just like your immediate impulse was to say, of course it's not moral to own people's property. You are better than your holy book. You are better than your God. You have benefited from an enlightened society around you that discovered, unlike the people who founded this nation, that slavery is immoral. Slavery is a stain on the United States and every other civilized country. And where it still goes on in some form or another, it's an abomination that deserves to be opposed nonstop. Almost everyone recognizes this. And yet when people get involved in trying to defend their religion, they will tap dance and twist and turn. Well, that was only moral then. Okay.
Yeah.
When did it stop becoming moral? When did it stop being moral and why? Why was it okay back then?
Yeah.
Was it okay to rape back then too?
Yeah. Did God change?
Yeah. Did the unchanging source of morality change at some point? It's a bizarre kind of, I don't know. I've just been rambling on about this and we need to get to